Welcome to Legacy Black of Power. 10 black musicians and performers who died live on stage. Have you ever seen a star give their very last breath to the music that defined their soul? It sounds almost impossible, but for some black performers, the stage wasn't just where they shine brightest. It became the place where their lives ended. No final bow, no encore, just an eerie silence as the spotlight faded forever. In this video, we remember 10 legendary black musicians and performers who met their tragic end right in front of the audiences they lived to move. Papa Wemba, Ivory Coast, April 2016. The night was electric at the Festival de Musiques Urbaines d'Innummable. Thousands filled the air with joy, rhythm, and anticipation, waiting for one man. On stage stood Jules Shungu Wembediopine Kikumba, better known as Papa Wemba, the crowned king of Congolese rumba. At 66, he looked every bit the legend, sharp, flamboyant, and untouchable in his trademark sapeur style. His voice, a force of nature, velvet and fire all at once, the kind of sound that could make angels dance or bring them to tears. This wasn't just a concert. It was a coronation, decades of musical reign being celebrated in real time. He sang, he strutted, his band crashing like thunder behind him. Every note, every step was charged with the very spirit of Africa. Papa Wemba wasn't simply performing, he was commanding. And then the unthinkable. In the middle of his glory, mid-song, his body betrayed him. One moment, he was a vibrant king. The next, he stumbled and collapsed under the lights. At first, dancers thought it was theater, but then the panic set in. The music stopped. The crowd froze in disbelief. Paramedics rushed in, but the legend had already taken his final bow. The microphone slipped from his hand. The roar of the crowd dissolved into a stunned, aching silence. Some said it was a seizure, others a heart attack. But what no one disputed was this. Papa Wemba lived his art until his very last breath. The man who once sang, "The show must go on," proved it, dying on the very stage that made him immortal. The festival ended in heartbreak. Fans walked away in tears. A king had fallen, not in quiet retreat, but in the middle of a song. And if that doesn't shake your soul, imagine this. What happens when Mama Africa herself, the voice of resistance, the heartbeat of a continent, sings her final note and falls? Stay with us, because the next story will break you. Miriam Makeba's final song. November 9th, 2008, Castel Volturno, Italy. The stage glowed with purpose. The night was more than just music. It was a stand of solidarity for Roberto Saviano, the Italian author who lived under constant police guard for daring to expose the mafia in his book Gomorrah. At the heart of it all was Miriam Makeba, Mama Africa herself, still a blazing force at 76. Her voice that night was not merely sound. It was history, defiance, pain, and freedom woven into every note. She poured herself into performance, singing not just for the cause, but as the cause. When she lifted her voice for her iconic hit Pata Pata, the infectious anthem that once made the whole world dance, the crowd erupted, celebrating a woman whose life had always been bigger than music. But as the applause thundered, fate intervened. Just as she stepped off stage, she collapsed. No warning, no goodbye. The light that filled the stage went out in an instant, rushed to a nearby clinic. The news was devastating, a massive heart attack. The voice that had defied apartheid, endured exile, and sung truth to power was silenced only moments after her last song. Makeba had often said she would sing until the very end, and she did. Her passing wasn't simply death. It was the ultimate encore, a haunting vow fulfilled, a final act of defiance. To lose a legend is always a wound, but to lose her mid-resistance, with her voice still echoing in the air, that is the kind of heartbreak history never lets go. Fatman Scoop, August 30th, 2024. Hampton Town Center Park, Connecticut. It was a Friday night thick with energy. The air buzzed. The crowd pressed shoulder to shoulder, and everyone knew this was going to be one for the books. A free concert, headlined by the man who could turn any gathering into an earthquake, Isaac Freeman III. The world knew him as Fatman Scoop, the voice that shook nightclubs from New York to Tokyo. the ultimate hype man, the thunder that made crowds lose their minds. From his iconic anthem Be Faithful to explosive collaborations with Missy Elliott and Sierra, Scoop wasn't just performing. He was setting stages on fire. At 53, he moved like a man half his age, every roar into the mic hitting like lightning. His mission was simple: get people on their feet. And he never failed. That night, when the beat dropped, the park erupted. Thousands screamed as Scoop shouted, "Engine, engine number 9." His words sent shockwaves through the crowd. He was pure adrenaline, the living heartbeat of party. But in the middle of the chaos, everything stopped. Scoop stumbled, then collapsed. 1 second, he was a storm in the mic. The next, silence. Gasps ripped through the crowd. His team rushed to him. Paramedics cut through the sea of stunned faces. The music died, and the entire park seemed to hold its breath. He was rushed to the hospital, but the news that followed shattered hearts. Fatman Scoop, the man who never let the vibe die, had just delivered his final show. Early reports said it was a sudden medical emergency. The exact cause wasn't clear, but for those who witnessed it, the shock was seared into memory. They had come for hype. They left in heartbreak. To see a man so full of fire fall silent before your eyes, it's the kind of moment that never leaves you. And as if fate couldn't be crueler, imagine this: a legend, one half of an unstoppable duo, collapsing in front of thousands, as if his body had whispered a prophecy of a life destined to end too soon. October 14th, 1967. Hampton-Sydney College, Virginia. Motown is sweeping across America like wildfire, and that night on stage stood two of its brightest flames: the smooth, magnetic Marvin Gaye and the radiant, sparkling Tammy Terrell. Together, they were pure magic. Their voices melted into each other like silk and fire. Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Your Precious Love. Songs pulsing with hope, romance, and soul. They were young. They were black. They were unstoppable. But mid-performance, the magic cracked. For weeks, Tammy, just 22, had been quietly suffering from crushing headaches. Still, like the consummate professional, she smiled through the pain, sang through the ache, until suddenly, her knees buckled, her body gave out, and under the blazing stage lights, in front of a stunned audience, she collapsed straight into Marvin's arms. The music stopped. The crowd froze. Marvin, horrified, cradled her like something fragile. Carrying her off stage as silence swallowed the room. It wasn't the end that night, but it was the beginning of the end. Doctors soon found the truth: a malignant brain tumor. Tammy fought with everything she had, enduring surgery after surgery, pushing through unimaginable pain just to record a few more songs with Marvin, songs that sounded like love, laced with sorrow. Her health never returned. On March 16, 1970, 1 month before her 25th birthday, Tammy Terrell was gone. That night on stage hadn't taken her life, but it had stolen something. It was a chilling preview of the tragedy to come. Some artists collapse from exhaustion. Others fall from grace. But Tammy fell mid-song, still pouring love into every note. And her story was only one kind of stage tragedy. Because what happens when a guitar god burns through his very last breath mid-solo, in a smoky bar, fingers still on fire? Stay tuned. Johnny Guitar Watson, the legend's final solo. May 17th, 1996, Yokohama, Japan. The lights dim, the crowd roars, and then he appears. Johnny Guitar Watson, the original gangster love, the funky Superman with a 6-string cape. At 61 years old, this wasn't just another show. It was a masterclass in soul, swagger, and pure electricity. Watson had been shredding boundaries since the 1950s, bending strings in ways that inspired giants like Jimi Hendrix and Frank Zappa. But he wasn't content to live in the past. By the 70s, he reinvented himself as a funk powerhouse, smooth, stylish, and street smart, turning every performance into an event. His guitar didn't just play notes. It grinned, it growled, it danced. And his lyrics, they were as bold and witty as the man himself. That night at the Ocean Boulevard Cafe, he was on fire. His guitar snarled, his voice soared. The crowd was locked in a spell. But then, mid-solo, mid-magic, everything changed. Johnny staggered, collapsed, the guitar still hanging across his chest like a warrior's shield. The music stopped. The room froze. A rush of panic followed, but it was too late. A massive heart attack had struck him down, right there on stage. For the audience, it felt like watching lightning, blinding, brilliant, and gone in an instant. One moment he was flying, the next, silence. Johnny Guitar Watson died the way only legends do, doing what he loved, pouring out every last drop of soul, his guitar still in his hands. He was a chameleon, a pioneer, a performer who never stopped evolving. His final note wasn't just the end of the song, it was the close of an era. And while his death carried the drama of a rock and roll ending, Johnny made it feel like poetry. But it raises a haunting thought. If a guitar god can fall mid-performance, what about a piano man? A master of the keys, fingers dancing over ivory in front of the world, until the rhythm stops, and so does the heart. Toots Washington, August 5th, 1984. New Orleans, Louisiana. The World's Fair pulsed with energy. Cultures colliding, colors blazing, music pouring from every corner of the Crescent City. And at the very center of it all sat a man who was New Orleans. Not a star chasing headlines, but a quiet legend whose fingers carried a century's worth of sound. Isidore Toots Washington, 77 years old, ruled his piano like a king on his throne. What he played wasn't just music. It was a summoning. Boogie-woogie, blues, jazz, ghosts of the city's past, stitched together into one living, breathing soundtrack. Toots was never a household name, but to those who truly understood New Orleans music, he was sacred. A direct line back to the old masters who taught him not with sheet music, but with heart and soul. His touch was delicate yet commanding, heavy with swing and sorrow, always laced with that unmistakable second-line rhythm that made New Orleans move. On that summer day, in front of an adoring crowd at the World's Fair, Toots did what he had always done. He told stories without a single word, letting the piano speak his truth. But then, mid-performance, as his hands glided across the keys, the music suddenly stopped. Toots Washington collapsed at his bench, fell by a heart attack, right there in the city he embodied, at the instrument that was his voice. The same hands that once danced with the spirit of New Orleans went still. The crowd froze. The piano fell silent. And just like that, his final song was over. There's a haunting poetry in it. To die in rhythm with the very city that shaped you, like a jazz priest delivering his last sermon. A heart breaking in time with the blues. Toots Washington didn't just pass away. He became the last note in a lifelong symphony. Imagine it. A piano man's final breath carried on a melody only he could play. August 27th, 1971. Chicago, Illinois. The jazz world was still in mourning, still stunned by the loss of the man who gave its heartbeat, Louis Armstrong. Just weeks after his passing, a memorial concert was held at the Chicago Civic Center Plaza, broadcast live to millions. Among the performers was a woman whose connection to Satchmo went beyond music, Lil Hardin Armstrong. She wasn't just another guest. She was his second wife, a brilliant pianist, composer, and band leader in her own right. She was the one who recognized his genius before anyone else, who pushed him into the spotlight, who shaped the sound that would make him a legend. That day, Lil sat at the piano under the glow of cameras and the weight of a hushed, grieving crowd. Her final gift was a song, a farewell wrapped in melody. She chose St. Louis Blues, a standard heavy with memory, a tune that carried the echoes of their shared history, their love, their tangled story. Her fingers moved with grace and sorrow, every note a confession of loss, every chord a cry from the soul. And then the unimaginable, mid-performance, right there before the world, Lil Hardin Armstrong collapsed at the piano. A massive heart attack silenced her mid-song, mid-tribute, mid-goodbye. She was rushed to the hospital but never recovered. At 73 years old, she passed just an hour later. A goodbye within a goodbye. A heart that literally broke in the act of remembering another. So poetic, so tragically perfect, it feels like something out of fiction. Yet it was heartbreakingly real. But what if Lil wasn't the only one? What if there were others, soul singers, showmen, stars, who gave everything to the stage, only to die mid-performance, mid-song, mid-scream, in front of a stunned, silent audience. Philippe Wynne, July 14, 1984, Oakland, California. Ivy's nightclub pulsed with electricity. The room was packed wall to wall, a sea of eager faces. Every eye locked on the stage. They weren't just there for music. They were there to witness a legend reclaim his throne. Philippe Wynne, the dazzling former lead singer of the Spinners, was back where he belonged. In the 1970s, his voice was everywhere. That soaring tenor carried timeless hits. I'll Be Around, Could Be I'm Falling in Love, The Rubber Band Man. But what made him unforgettable wasn't just the songs. It was him, the fearless ad-libs, the sweat-drenched passion, the preacher's fire that turned every performance into a spiritual revival. Even as a solo act, he still had that magic touch. That night, he gave it all. The band was locked in tight, the groove irresistible. Wynne was flying, hitting those high, hair-raising notes with the same power and purity that made him famous. He was lifting the crowd higher, taking them to church, to heaven, to anywhere his voice could reach. And then, without warning, mid-note, mid-performance, he fell. A massive heart attack struck like lightning. One moment, he was a man on fire. The next, silence. The crowd froze. Then came the screams, the chaos. Philippe Wynne was gone at just 43 years old, still in his prime, still singing like a man with 100 more songs inside him. To lose a voice like his, not quietly, not in obscurity, but right there before the people who adored him, doing the very thing he was born to do, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was a heartbreak for soul music itself. A final performance that became a final farewell. Lee Morgan, February 19th, 1972. New York City was buried under snow, the streets frozen in silence. But inside Slug Saloon, a cramped, smoke-filled jazz club in the East Village, the air was on fire. On stage, Lee Morgan's trumpet wasn't just playing notes. It was crying, shouting, healing, bleeding. He wasn't another musician passing through. He was a prodigy of hard bop, the kid who once traded riffs with Dizzy Gillespie, the young lion who gave Art Blakey's jazz messengers their relentless heartbeat. With the Sidewinder, he didn't just score a hit, he carved out a sound that defined an era. But genius always walks a razor's edge. For years, heroin had nearly swallowed him whole. What pulled him back wasn't rehab or luck. It was Helen Moore. She was more than his common-law wife. She was his manager, his anchor, his storm. She booked his gigs, kept him alive, even as her love burned hot, wild, and sometimes violent. That night, after a blistering set that left the crowd breathless, something shifted. Between songs, between glances, a spark turned into a fight. Words were hurled, tempers flared. Helen was thrown out into the cold night. Minutes later, she came back, this time holding the pistol Lee himself had once given her for protection. And in an instant, the club fell silent. One shot, Lee Morgan, the man whose horn could sound like Sunday morning salvation or Saturday night heartbreak, collapsed in front of friends, fans, and fellow musicians. Not from overdose, not from illness, from a bullet. The snowstorm outside trapped the ambulance on its way. By the time it finally reached Slugs, Lee Morgan had already bled out on the floor. He was just 33. He didn't die with a trumpet in his hands, but only steps away from it, surrounded not by glory but by tragedy. This wasn't just another story of love gone wrong. This was jazz's darkest ballad. A love that saved him, destroyed him, and silenced one of the greatest horns the world had ever heard. And if you think that's the end of heartbreak in music, wait until you hear the story of an R&B rising star whose own reckless moment backstage would cost him his life in a way no one could have imagined. Christmas Day, 1954, Houston, Texas. The City Auditorium was alive with energy as fans cheered for Johnny Ace, the 25-year-old R&B sensation whose silky voice turned heartbreak into gold. With hits like My Song, The Clock, and Pledging My Love, he had become a voice of young romance. And that night the house was packed to see him. But behind the curtain, joy was about to turn into tragedy. During intermission, Johnny Ace, born John Marshall Alexander Jr., was backstage, playing carelessly with a .22 caliber revolver. Some said he was showing off. Others swore it was a reckless game of Russian roulette. Witnesses, including blues powerhouse Big Mama Thornton, would never forget what happened next. Ignoring warnings, Johnny gave a confident grin and brushed off concern. He supposedly said, "Don't worry, the gun's not loaded. Watch this." Then, in one chilling instant, he raised a revolver to his head and pulled the trigger. The shot exploded. A bullet was in the chamber. Panic erupted. Johnny collapsed. Within moments, he was gone. A career that had barely begun, extinguished in the blink of an eye. What was meant to be a night of celebration became his final act. His last performance turned into his eulogy. The R&B world was stunned. This wasn't an illness. This was an attack. It was one fatal, irreversible mistake in a quiet backstage room on Christmas Day. On July 17th, 2006, Memphis, Tennessee, was alive with music at the New Daisy Theater on Beale Street, where a tribute concert honored the blues. But the real heartbreak had already struck days earlier. Jessie Mae Hemphill, the fearless matriarch of Mississippi Hill country blues and granddaughter of the legendary Sid Hemphill, had already taken her final bow. Jessie wasn't just a blues singer, she was a blues. Her weathered voice carried generations of pain and joy. Her guitar growled with grit, and when her foot tambourine stomped, it was as if the Delta itself was breathing through her. For decades, she brought the primal heartbeat of the blues from dusty backwoods and smoky juke joints to international stages, never once softening her fire. Then came the cruel twist. In the early 90s, a stroke paralyzed her left side and stole her ability to play guitar. But Jessie refused to surrender. With her good hand, she clutched her tambourine, singing with raw defiance, proving that the blues wasn't about perfection. It was about survival. Her last performance wasn't beneath festival lights or in front of roaring crowds. It was inside a quiet Memphis church, where Jessie Mae sang not for fame, but for God. She gave her soul one final time, the same soul she had always given the blues. As she returned to her seat, a second stroke struck her down. She survived a moment, but it felt like the Lord himself had called her curtain. Just 5 days later, on July 22nd, 2006, she was gone. That church became her last stage. The pews were her audience. And her final song wasn't just a farewell. It was an offering. Jessie Mae Hemphill didn't leave in silence. She left in rhythm, in spirit, in reverence. Her body may have rested, but her blues, raw, sacred, eternal, still echo on. Big Joe Turner, the boss of the blues. November 24th, 1985, Englewood, California. The lights were dim, the band was cooking, and Big Joe Turner, the powerhouse voice behind Shake, Rattle, and Roll, stood where he belonged, in the spotlight. At 74, he wasn't just performing music. He was carrying history on his shoulders. From the smoke-filled clubs of Kansas City in the 30s to the dawn of rock and roll, Turner had been there, bellowing the blues with a thunder no one could match. They didn't call him the boss of the blues for nothing. His voice didn't just sing. It roared, it commanded, it rattled walls and set souls on fire. That night, the fire was still there. The crowd felt it. Every note came soaked with decades of grit, swing, and heart. But in the middle of one of his signature shouts, tragedy struck. Big Joe collapsed right there on stage, under the same hot lights that had framed his entire life. The booming voice fell silent in an instant. Rushed to the hospital. Doctor confirmed what no one wanted to hear. A massive heart attack. Just like that, one of the last living giants linking the blues to rock and roll was gone. Yet, Big Joe Turner never faded away quietly. He sang until his final breath. And in a strange, poetic way, it was the only fitting farewell for a man who lived to perform to leave this world in the middle of a song. The boss had shouted his last note, and the silence that followed carried the weight of half a century of sweat, soul, and song. Jackie Wilson. September 29th, 1975, Latin Casino, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. The air inside was electric. Fans whispered, cheered, and leaned forward in their seats. Mr. Excitement himself was about to take the stage. Jackie Wilson, a human spark plug, a 4-octave tenor whose voice soared, and whose footwork blazed a trail years before Michael Jackson ever moonwalked. With anthems like Lonely Teardrops, Higher and Higher, and Repetit, Jackie wasn't just an entertainer. He was pure lightning bottled in flesh and rhythm. That night, he was billed as part of Dick Clark's Good Old Rock and Roll Review. The crowd expected magic, because Jackie always delivered. Some witnesses say he had just stepped into the spotlight. Others swear he had already begun belting Lonely Teardrops when tragedy struck. In an instant, his body crumpled. A massive heart attack, followed by a stroke, sent him crashing to the stage floor. His head hit hard, leaving him with catastrophic brain damage. Jackie didn't die that night. In some ways, the cruelest twist was that he lived. He slipped into a coma, then a semi-coma that stretched across 9 silent, merciless years. Years spent in hospital rooms, unable to speak, unable to move. The man who once danced across America's stages like a whirlwind became a still shadow of himself. On January 21st, 1984, Jackie Wilson finally passed from pneumonia, never opening his eyes to the world again. His collapse wasn't just in a concert. It was a closing curtain on a life built on sound, sweat, and soul. Jackie Wilson, the firecracker who gave everything to his music, didn't receive the thunderous ovation he deserved that night. Instead, he was met with silence, a silence that echoed for years, marking the tragic fall of a man who lived for the stage and never rose again. Wilson Pickett, January 19, 2006, Reston, Virginia. They called him the Wicked Pickett, and on that night, soul music's wild flame burned as fiercely as ever. At 64, he wasn't just a relic of the 60s and 70s. He was still fire in motion. Sweat clung to his brow. The roar of the crowd still thundered in the air, and the man behind in the midnight hour, Mustang Sally, and Land of 10,000 Dances, had once again left the stage in a blaze of raw, untamed energy. Gritty, electrifying, unforgettable. He gave it all like he always did, his voice a storm, his presence pure voltage. And then just moments after stepping off stage, his heart, heavy with decades of rhythm, heartbreak, and soul, suddenly gave out, rushed to a nearby hospital, but too late. The voice that had once rattled the heavens had fallen silent. Wilson Pickett had sung his final note. It didn't happen mid-song. There was no dramatic collapse under the spotlight, but in its own brutal poetry it was fitting. The man who lived for the stage, who bled music, left this world doing what he loved most, pouring every ounce of himself into his art. That last performance, unknowingly, became his swan song. The Wicked Pickett had howled his final "na na na na," and when the lights dimmed on that stage, the midnight hour struck for him one last time. It was the kind of ending that makes you wonder, what if the spotlight is the final destination? When the curtain falls so suddenly, so shockingly, that it blurs the line between tragedy and legend, some deaths become myths, replayed in whispers, etched into the memories of fans forever. Because watching someone give everything, only to vanish in an instant, that changes you. It's a nightmare unfolding in the middle of a dream, and it forces us to face the truth. Our idols, the ones who feel larger than life, are fragile too. They give us joy, release catharsis. Sometimes, they even give us their last breath. And when that final bow comes, quiet, sudden, irreversible, it leaves behind an ache, a ghost note suspended in the air, a crowd locked in heartbreak. The curtain falls, and for them, the show is truly tragically over. That's the end of this story, but not the end of the journey. If this moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with us for more untold stories that keep the legends alive. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.